Hello, scholars. Dr. Ball. This is my second take on the video because I didn't realize my screen was not sharing. Okay, so I want to cover quickly the basic concepts you need to understand. Please go back and review them in your lessons. These are critical for you to understand statistics. The first thing that I would like to point out is hypotheses. Okay, so hypotheses, there are basically two for everything. I mean, I guess, you could switch things up a little bit, but for the purpose of your dissertation, if you're testing a hypothesis, you'll have a hypothesis that says something's going on here, and a hypothesis that says nothing's going on here. The null hypothesis is always the one that says nothing's going on, okay? And please refer to your lessons over how to write that up in statistical language. To be perfectly frank with you, I never write up in statistical language. I always have to stop and look up all the symbols. I write it in English. Wrote it in English in my dissertation too. So the hypothesis in my dissertation was the null hypothesis, the one that says nothing's going on here. There is not a statistically significant difference between grade levels in the number of kids who bullied. Nothing's going on. Okay, so if there's nothing going on, and I say there is, that's a false positive, right? It's type 1 error. Type 1 error is the worst kind of error. That's why it's a type 1. You never want to commit a type 1 error. That's a false positive. That's saying there's something going on when there's nothing going on. Could you imagine being told you had cancer with a false positive? So there's nothing going on and they tell you there's something going on. False positive. We never want those. If you're faced with a decision and you're not certain which hypothesis to accept or reject, you always err on the side of caution and say there's nothing going on. It's because some of you might find if you test your work in more than one way, whether or not you accept or reject the null hypothesis changes. Now, we refer to hypothesis testing as, did you accept the null? Nothing's going on. Or did you reject the null? We never say we accepted the hypothesis. We'd say we failed to reject the null hypothesis. See that down here? We failed to reject the null. That means something's going on. Now, if something's going on, and you say there's nothing going on, a false negative, that's a type 2 error. Now, for anybody who has a learning disability involving their sense of direction like I do, or a tracking problem, I would screenshot this and keep this with you, especially when it comes time to write your dissertation, so you can remember which directions these errors go. But the type 1 error is the worst error. Okay, so you'll write out your hypotheses. There is a statistically significant difference between grade levels in the number of kids who bully. Now, I already know there is because in middle school it's at its height. And my null hypothesis, there is not a statistically significant difference between grade levels and the number of students who bully. Okay, so that's writing out our hypothesis. Now we've covered type 1 and type 2 error. The other thing that I would like you to see is the difference between 1- and 2-tailed tests. Okay? Here we have examples of a 1-tailed test. That's what we're talking about. We're talking about the distribution. We're looking at that alpha, the possibility of being in that last standard deviation, that little tiny percentage there, right? And if we're only looking at one direction, you're going to hear words like increase or decrease. Is there a statistically significant increase in reading scores for children who had phonics versus children who did not? I'm only looking one direction, and I'm only looking to see, honestly, I'm looking at the right tail to see if scores increased. Okay. Most of the time, almost all the time, you're going to do a two-tailed test. Please remember that. Well, a one-tailed test is more powerful and more likely to find a difference. If there's something going on the other direction, you'll miss it. Notice my hypothesis is there a statistically significant difference in the number of kids who bully between grade levels. I looked both ways. I didn't say, does bullying increases as children get older? Is there a statistically significant increase in bullying? That's a one-tailed test. I did a two-tailed test. So a two-tailed test looks both directions. And I was looking for his example and I'm not, there it is. Okay. So if we look right up here at the two-tailed test, we're looking at increase and decrease. So just for a difference, relationship is the same way because you can have a positive or a negative relationship, two-tailed test. So for almost all of you, I would tell you if you're testing in your dissertation, you want to look both directions. Again, a one-tailed test is more powerful, but it only looks that one direction. Okay. So